Welcome to Kuwait's Industrial Automation and Control Systems Cybersecurity Conference, KIACS Cybersecurity 2014, 25 through 26 May 2014. Hosted and organized by Kuwait Petrochemical Company in partnership with KPC.
So, ladies and gentlemen, let's meet our next speaker. This is, of course, presentation 11, and I'm delighted to have on the stage shortly Richard Powell, who is the Manager of Cybersecurity Solutions at Plant Automation Services, PAS Incorporated. And this afternoon, he's going to be speaking on configuration management, cornerstone of control system cybersecurity. And having worked in several sectors, Richard has an extensive knowledge in nuclear and electric power operations, as well as communication security. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause and welcome to Richard Powell.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to start up, before I get started, thanking our hosts for just the wonderful hospitality all week and the fantastic lunch that we just had. There we go. So this afternoon, as was mentioned, my name is Rich Powell. I'm the Manager of Cybersecurity Solutions for PAS. My most recent background with control systems was 12 years in the electric power industry in the United States, running a security and cyber compliance program for a large utility in the southeast U.S. We're going to start reiterating something that has been hit repeatedly this week. So I think, is there anyone in the room who doesn't believe there's a threat to industrial control systems from cyber attack? No? Okay. I think we have that one nailed down. So the key point I want to make here is that the attacks are getting more and more sophisticated. As you can see in the center of the center bottom of the screen, there are even tools now, such as Showdan, which is sort of a Google for industrial control systems, allowing people to search for various control systems that are exposed to the internet. So let's start by talking, and we'll build towards configuration management. What I really want to do is talk about where the security architecture is today, the strengths and weaknesses of it, and ways to help firm up or shore up the inside of the security. So when I look at the security of an industrial control system, I see a soft-boiled egg. Now, let me explain that. Most people have firewalls, intrusion detection systems, very strong protections on the outside of the control system. That's your shell. Then you step inside, and for the servers, the HMIs, the network devices, you have antivirus, possibly. You possibly have whitelisting services. So there's some level of protection for those devices. Then we get to the yoke, okay, the proprietary systems, the runny yoke. There aren't any protections at that level for a couple of reasons. First, they're proprietary systems. Most of the security tools out there today are built for what we call IT devices. The second, the communication paths. Most security tools are built for IP. A lot of the proprietary type devices may be, as been mentioned, Modbus or serial connected devices. So we have that architecture that's pretty typical across market sectors, across industries. And if we look at the threats that we have against that type of architecture, you can see everything from remote access threats to misconfigured firewalls to external networks connected into a process control network, say for a support vendor, all the way down to what's been mentioned very, very frequently, infected flash drives. So everyone's favorite, and probably the greatest threat to industrial control systems is insider threats. So a lot of these are inadvertent, as been mentioned earlier, just like how Stuxnet work. It came in on a flash drive, infected the support software for a PLC, and sat there and waited until it was connected to the PLC in order to affect the firmware. The key point that I want to make here is most of these attacks are inadvertent, but primarily that this marked a change to attacks and showed the vulnerabilities on the proprietary type devices. I'll pause here and see if people can identify the threat. It takes a few seconds. But even inadvertent threats, they are among us, they look just like us, but they are there. So when we look at the traditional architecture in a company, you have, starting on the left-hand side at the internet, no protections. It's just wild and woolly on the internet. On the right-hand side are the control systems. These are the most sensitive systems for a company. And they are the most sensitive systems for two reasons. First off, they contain the proprietary information specific to your company. The systems used for one refinery are typically the same that are used at a second refinery, the same with pharmaceuticals and such. The difference between the two products is contained in the recipe or the configuration of those control systems. The second purpose behind this, and that it's the most protected, is the potential for damage. If these systems are interrupted, you have a loss of potential revenue, or if you have a loss of control on your systems, you could have equipment damage or potentially injury to personnel. So for this reason, the control systems are placed furthest away from the internet, and they are protected the most. Now going back and looking at the control system itself, you have two very specific type of devices. You have the IT type devices and then the proprietary side. As we mentioned in the discussion of the egg, the servers, the workstations, HMIs, switches are IT type devices. So there are some protections, so security tools that can be applied to them. But for the balance of the control network, so the proprietary side, these tools don't apply there. So in most cases, you're depending on the perimeter protections and the controls at the HMI or the server. There's really no protection for the proprietary system other than these. So how we can protect these devices is by looking at the configuration, monitoring the configuration, watching for changes to these configurations. This is further illustrated. You take a look at a typical architecture and showing level 1 and even to some degree level 2 with the proprietary systems and then the applications on the HMIs and servers. So, to handle the configuration, and the reason this is so important, because it's a foundation, it's the cornerstone, as I mentioned in the title, of a security program. And the parts of configuration management, first off, inventory. Knowing what you have in your control system. A lot of customers that I've talked to have this issue. They don't know exactly what is in their control system. It's pretty hard to manage security of something if you don't know it's there. Second is a configuration baseline. Maintaining a current state and knowing exactly how the devices are configured. Then we move into change monitoring. And this takes up, there's two aspects to this. First, you have detecting changes to the configuration of the devices on the process control network. And the second is managing those. So managing those through a workflow. And if we can detect those changes, and we can integrate those changes with your change management system or a workflow engine, this allows us to do some pretty powerful things in the realm of security. If we can designate specific configuration items that are security related, and we are tied to our work management, or our change management system, then we can initiate response processes for unauthorized changes. So let's talk about that workflow. As I mentioned, having a workflow engine integrated with a configuration database allows you to make that workflow engine intelligent. So, stepping back, and let's look at the gears on the bottom of this slide. Every company has a similar process as far as performing work on the process control network. Companies have a work management system. So let's take a project such as upgrading a DCS. So every company has a work management system that the project is configured in and tracked in. This contains financial information, inventory information. It's linked to the business systems. That work management system, the project within the work management system, then generates changes that must occur on the controls network. That goes over to the change management system. From the change management system, the engineer administratively documents, gets approval for the changes, and then goes out and performs the change. He then comes back to the change management system and checks off that, yes, I made the change and everything went well. That, at this point, is our reconciliation process. And what I'm saying is, by detecting the changes in the system, that allows us to vet that in a systematic manner. And now you can complete the loop from the work management system all the way down to the change reconciliation and back up the chain in an automated fashion and provide complete controls. Starting at the work management system, saying, we have this project, upgraded DCS. That involves rolling out software to the servers, which results in a change management request. The change management request is completed, approved, the change is made, the change is reconciled, which is pushed back up as documentation to the change management system, which is then attached to the project up in the work management system, completely closing the process with a complete assurance that only what was intended to be changed was actually changed. Now, taking that further to a security side, so now we have an assurance that the configuration is maintained in a known state. Now, if we can identify which of the configuration items are related to security, and in this system, we can detect the changes, and we can reconcile them to approved changes. Now what we have the ability to do is say, if there's a change to a security configuration item that was not associated or not reconciled to an approved change management request, we need to initiate an incident response process. So we need to send an email, we need to notify the people, and then track the work. One of the other important aspects, some of the earlier speakers have mentioned the different vulnerabilities that are out there for the proprietary side or for the Windows side. And so having the ability to manage those or systematically assess vulnerabilities or patches that come out will greatly speed the process and your ability to manage the vulnerabilities, manage the risk to the infrastructure. So, summarizing, and what I'm saying, the configuration management as the foundation for security on the process controls network. We have the perimeter protections that are very strong and control the traffic into and out of the network. We even have protections of some sort at the HMIs and servers. But that does not protect us from, as we discussed earlier, the insider threats. So someone could take a flash drive or a laptop, and with the need to locally configure a PLC, connect it directly to the PLC and introduce malware that way. So we need a way to monitor for that and protect against it. And by monitoring the configuration and the changes to the configuration across the entire process control network gives us a complete picture or the final level of detection for security on the process control network. Now also, security is the primary intent, but there are also some productivity gains to be gained through this by having a centralized configuration database for the control system and having it in an automated fashion from all the control systems within a plant. This allows the engineers to research issues in the plant much more quickly, allows you to respond much more quickly and keep the processes up and running. So, finally, as I mentioned earlier, I came from the electric power industry and dealing with the NERC CIP regulations in the United States. What I have seen is automation of these type of activities can provide or reduce the manpower required to perform these activities up to 90%. So, and finally, once you have the configuration database, change detection on it, you have it's important to be able to tie these systems to your existing business systems and other security systems so that you have not only a whole picture of what's happening with the configuration on the process control network, but you also have that visibility and you can provide that information to the corporate SIM, or security incident and event monitoring, or your work management system, or your corporate compliance systems. So, any questions? I went through that very quickly.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've actually got 10 minutes worth of Q&A. So again, state your name, your company, and your question, please.
Thank you. This is Carl from KNPC. Richard, thanks for touching on the Showdan network. I was quite anxious to actually see somebody talking about it. I'd really like you to, just for a moment, expand on what Showdan is, how Showdan queries can be launched, and what can be extracted out of it, and why it is a real threat to anybody out there, and why it is a real tool for security researchers inside companies.
Certainly. So Showdan, So Showdan, as I mentioned, is been likened to Google for control systems. Showdan is a tool which allows you to code a query and scan the internet for internet-facing devices. And so by doing this, you can see if someone knows, for example, a specific controller is used by, say, the water industry, and there's a specific vulnerability for that controller. A query can be written to show every place in the world where that specific controller is used or is exposed to the internet. And then you can let your mind run wild from there, because now all you have to do is use the exploit that you have, the Metasploit tool or any scripts that you may have on that. So Showdan is an extremely powerful tool for hackers to see and to gather intelligence for companies by identifying what systems they have exposed to the internet. Now, it's also, not everything's bad, it's also a very good tool, and I've seen it used by security teams at companies to take a look at their own IP space and see if there are any of their own assets which are exposed to the internet, which may have happened inadvertently or without their knowledge. So it's a very powerful tool for both hackers and corporate security. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mohammed Saeed, Saudi Aramco. My question is regarding the anti-malware or malware detection system. Why we need to use it together with the whitelisting, while the whitelisting allows only the trusted system to communicate with our networks in the plants? And why we're going to use also malware detection system while usually the plants network communicate with only the enterprise? There is no interface with the internet, and malware mainly for HTTP or some protocol mainly using with the internet.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So, starting with the malware and the whitelisting on the control system. So, both systems don't necessarily have to be used, but it is important to have one or the other, or some layer of protection on those HMIs. Strictly for the reason most of the system are Windows, most of the vulnerabilities that are out there are for Windows. Now that leads right into your second question, which was if our process control network is logically separated and doesn't have any access to the internet, where's the threat? So I go back to the insider threat. If you have a controls engineer that has a laptop because he supports remote installations, and he also uses that for company use. He may be stopped by a Starbucks and he needs to research where he's going on vacation this year. So he uses his work laptop for that. And during that time, he downloads a virus because it is a public hotspot. And then he takes that same laptop. He gets a call and needs to perform some maintenance on a PLC or a controller. So he brings that in right around the firewall protection, right around the antivirus that may be on the HMIs or the whitelisting, and plugs directly into the controller or the PLC. So that's where none of these security protections will work in and of itself. So many of the speakers over the past 2 days have mentioned the layered defense. And so that goes not only from training the people, training personnel, but to providing protections on that laptop, at the firewall, on the HMIs and servers, all the way down to change control procedures.
Okay. Mohammed Al-Bahri from Kuwait. My question regarding the configuration management that you talked about during your presentation. How do you usually populate that configuration management tools inside the OT? And the most important thing is the relationship between the configuration items.
So, could you repeat the first part of your question?
Populating the configuration management tools. Is there
Okay.
any automated tools that can sense those different items?
Yes. Okay. So we're all very familiar. There are many tools on the IT side which collect configuration information. And they're very good, very powerful tools. The problem, and so those can be used in the process controls network to collect the HMI switch and server data. The trouble comes in with the proprietary systems. Now, each vendor provides their own configuration management tool. So a manual process could be scripted. Manual process could be used to accumulate all that data from the different configuration management tools and populate a database, and that could possibly be scripted. Now, my company, the Integrity product, automates that for systems. And so being able to bring that in from the various systems in an automated fashion. So it can be done either way, just some efficiency.
And we've got our final question here in the middle of the room. Sir, your name, your company, and your question, please.
Yes, my name is Syed Rabbani from KNPC. Is it possible to detect unauthorized changes to any component of DCS or SCADA systems? How do you know that this change which has happened is unauthorized? Because change management might give you authorization that might be recorded elsewhere, but through a USB or direct attack on the PLCs, how you will know that this change is unauthorized?
That's where the combination of technology with processes is key. some other speakers have mentioned people, processes, and technology. All three are essential for security. So the combination of processes, the change management process, and technology to detect changes to configuration and looking at the entire configuration is essential. And you need the combination of both in order to reconcile the changes to an approved change. So the second part of your question was on all aspects of configuration within the DCS, or actually for the flash drives. So monitoring every portion of the configuration, so the operating system, whether it be for the IT devices or the OT devices, and monitoring the proprietary side, so the application side, is critical for detecting issues there. As if you know about Stuxnet, it affected the firmware of the PLC. So you've got to be able to see the change in the firmware. It may be a configuration value within the control logic itself. Detecting that, whereas it may not be and it might not even be a security issue. It may have been an inadvertent change, but still monitoring that configuration and matching those configuration changes to approved changes is just part of a quality assurance test that affects both security as well as productivity.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's where we wrap up with Richard Powell. Thank you very much indeed.
Hosted and organized by Equate Petrochemical Company in partnership with KPC.